In October of 1998, a well-respected married couple vanished from their sprawling Austin estate. Their dinner table was set for two, their wine glasses still half full, but their Mercedes was gone, and so were they. For months, their names haunted the headlines. For years, their faces appeared on missing persons flyers across the state, and for decades, investigators tried and failed to explain what really happened behind the locked gates of their perfect suburban dream. Some say they ran away, some say they were silenced, but the truth is far stranger than anyone imagined. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, because today we're diving into one of the darkest, most chilling, vanishing cases you've never heard of. The house on Cherrywood Lane still looked immaculate from the street, a white column porch, manicured hedges trimmed into careful squares, and a black iron gate that whispered wealth and taste without ever raising its voice. To the neighbors who walked their dogs past its long driveway, it was a picture of permanence, a place that had seen dinner parties and anniversaries, carefully catered celebrations that stretched long into the summer nights. But if you stepped inside the estate now, you would find something else. Dust, silence, a faint smell of mold creeping up from the basement and on the dining room table. Still, after all these years, a set of crystal candlesticks, wax frozen mid-drip, as though time itself had been interrupted. The Holsteads had been gone for 22 years. Nathaniel and Claire Holstead, the couple everyone admired, envied, whispered about. He, a dentist turned real estate investor who climbed effortlessly from one fortune into another. She, a part-time art dealer with a wardrobe as carefully curated as her gallery collections. They seemed to glide through Austin society untouched by struggle. The Holsteads were beautiful, they were magnetic, and above all, they were untouchable until the night they disappeared. It began with silence. Claire's mother couldn't reach her by phone. Nathaniel missed a business meeting. Their housekeeper arrived to find the front door unlocked and the alarm system disabled. On the granite kitchen counter, a handbag lay open, its contents scattered as though dropped mid-task. In the master bedroom, the bed was turned down neatly, but unslept in. The Holsteads had vanished without a trace. For weeks, police dogs combed through wooded trails near their property. Helicopters swept the hill country. Theirs was the kind of case that demanded attention. A couple whose faces graced glossy magazines now staring out from police sketches and nightly news bulletins. But every lead ran dry. And then 3 months later, a break. A car, their Mercedes, abandoned off a rural back road 40 miles south. The keys still in the ignition, the leather seats mottled with rain. On the passenger side floor mat, faint stains, blood according to the preliminary tests, but not enough to confirm a crime, not enough to prove anything. What it did prove was worse, that the Holstead story had layers no one had considered, because when investigators ran the VIN number, when they opened the glove box, when they traced bank accounts tied to the insurance policies, what they found unraveled everything the neighbors thought they knew. Nathaniel Holstead had another identity, another life, another family. And Claire wasn't who she seemed either. It was a case that would twist into something far darker than a missing persons investigation. It would sprawl into a web of financial fraud, secret passports, and a trail of identities buried across the Southwest. A marriage built on glass and mirrors cracking apart under the weight of secrets that refused to stay hidden. 2 decades later, the story still hangs over Austin like a storm cloud. Every so often, a tip trickles into the police station. A sighting in Nevada, a dental record matching Nathaniel's alias in Arizona, a handbag found at an estate sale in Dallas, eerily similar to Claire's. Each clue reignites the case, and each time the truth slips away again. But tonight, we return to Cherrywood Lane, to the dining table with its wax-frozen candlesticks, to the place where a perfect marriage dissolved into one of Texas's most disturbing disappearances. Because if you peel back the veneer, you'll find something festering underneath. The Holsteads were not victims of a random crime. They were not simply unlucky. They were participants in a story far stranger than fiction. One where love was weaponized, trust was twisted, and survival meant becoming someone else entirely. The double life had begun long before they vanished, and it is still unraveling today. The tow yard smelled of rust and oil. Rows of dented vehicles sat beneath harsh floodlights, their broken windows glinting like dead eyes. Officer Daniel Kraus stood at the chain-link fence, arms folded tight, waiting for the wrecker to lower the Mercedes-Benz onto the gravel lot. It had been 3 months since Nathaniel and Claire Holstead disappeared. 3 months of unanswered calls, empty leads, and neighbors who swore the couple had simply skipped town. Some believed the Holsteads had debts. Others whispered about affairs. A few muttered about something darker, something involving organized crime. But tonight, standing in front of the silver Mercedes 500 liters, Kraus felt a shift. The first solid crack in the facade. The car looked ordinary at first glance, just weather-beaten from weeks abandoned in the hill country. A thin film of dirt streaked across the hood. The leather interior, pale cream, had been stained by rain leaking through a cracked sunroof. The keys still dangled from the ignition, and a scattering of leaves clung to the floor mats. But it wasn't the neglect that made Kraus's stomach tighten. It was the details. The glove compartment forced open with insurance cards under a different name. The faint reddish smear on the passenger side matte, too dark to be rust, and the faint deliberate scratch carved into the dashboard, a single initial, C. Document everything. Kraus instructed the crime texts as they circled the vehicle with cameras. Bag the keys. Print every surface. One officer leaned close to the passenger seat. "Sir, you'll want to see this." Kraus crouched down. At the edge of the floor mat, tucked half under the seat rail, was a thin slip of paper. He pulled on gloves and slid it free. A receipt. Austin gas station, dated 3 days after the Holsteads were last seen. That detail alone rewrote the timeline. Until now, investigators had believed the couple vanished on the 12th of October, the night they missed their dinner reservation at the Lake House Inn. Theories had clustered around that evening. A home invasion, a carjacking, maybe a spur-of-the-moment flight. But if the Mercedes had been filled at a pump days later, someone had been alive and moving. Someone had kept the story going after the public assumed it ended. Kraus slipped the receipt into an evidence bag. His pulse quickened behind him. The record driver spat into the gravel. Car wasn't even hidden that well. Just sitting out off County Road 221 near an old peon orchard. Surprised it took this long for anyone to notice. Kraus frowned. And no reports before today. Not a one. Some hunter must have spotted it this week. Called it in. The officer glanced back at the Benz, its headlights catching a flicker of reflection from the windshield. Something about it nodded at him. Why abandon a car where it would eventually be found? Why leave keys in the ignition, documents in the glove box? Unless that was the point. It wasn't just abandonment, it was theater. The next morning, Austin awoke to headlines. Holstead car found in rural field, missing couple mystery deepens. Reporters swarmed Cherrywood Lane, pressing microphones against the black iron gates. Camera crews angled lenses at the empty driveway. Neighbors impressed polo shirts and tennis skirts, offered sound bites. Lovely people, no enemies, always kept to themselves. So strange, just vanished. Inside the estate, Detective Evelyn Shaw studied the kitchen like a stage set. Claire's handbag still sat on the granite island, lipstick tubes rolling loose inside. 2 wine glasses stood by the sink, both half drained. The wine gone to vinegar, and in the dining room, those candlesticks, wax frozen in time. Shaw crouched beside a drawer, rifling through envelopes of bills. Her eyes narrowed at a credit card statement. Multiple charges in Los Cruz, New Mexico from just weeks before the disappearance. Boutique hotels, art supply stores, cash withdrawals, all under Claire's name. She tapped her pen against the page. Why drive to New Mexico without telling family? Why stay in hotels when you own a mansion? Her partner, Detective Raymond Vega, leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Maybe they were just getting away. Shaw shook her head. And leave everything behind. Phones, passports, clothes. It doesn't track. She spread the statements across the counter. Patterns emerged. Purchases far from Austin under names that didn't match. Receipts tucked into Claire's handbag bore different signatures, subtle variations of handwriting, some neat, some slanted, one written in a hurried scrawl. It was as if someone had been trying on identities like clothes. By the end of the week, the Mercedes yielded more secrets. Forensic labs confirmed the stain on the floor mat was blood, but not just one person's, 2 distinct profiles. Neither matched Nathaniel or Claire. That detail detonated through the department like a grenade. Could be transfer, Vega suggested grimly, flipping through the lab report. Someone else bled there before. The Holsteads might have never known, or, Shaw countered, they were with someone else. Someone no one has mentioned. Her voice echoed through the evidence room where photographs of the car lay pinned across a corkboard, the scratches, the smears, the receipt, the glove box with documents belonging to a man named David Rowe. No one in Austin knew a David Rowe, but in New Mexico that name carried weight. Shaw circled it in red marker. Beneath it, she scrolled a single phrase, the double life. The desert highway stretched in front of Detective Evelyn Shaw like a ribbon of cracked asphalt, heat shimmer rising from the sand on either side. She gripped the steering wheel of the unmarked sedan, her partner Vega half dozing in the passenger seat, his sunglasses sliding down the bridge of his nose. New Mexico wasn't new territory for her. She'd driven these roads years ago while shadowing a fugitive case, but there was something different about this trip. This wasn't a hunt for a stranger. This was the unraveling of two people whose photographs hung in polished frames above Cherrywood Lane fireplaces. People everyone thought they knew. They had left Austin at dawn. The Mercedes documents bagged in the trunk, credit card receipts, that Las Cruces trail, the glove box insurance paper under the name David Rowe. It was all they had, but it was enough to justify the drive. "Wake up," Shaw muttered, nudging Vega as they approached the city limits. "We're here." Vega rubbed his face. "Doesn't look like the kind of place millionaires hang out." Shaw didn't answer. She pulled into a cracked asphalt lot outside the Desert Star Motel, its neon sign flickering in the dry morning light. The statement from Claire's card had listed this address 2 weeks before she vanished. The motel office smelled of stale coffee and dust. A television buzzed in the corner, tuned to a soap opera with the volume low. Behind the counter sat a man with thinning hair and a heavy southwestern accent. "Afternoon," Shaw began, flashing her badge. "Detectives from Austin. We're looking for records from October, rooms registered under Claire Holstead or David Rowe." The man leaned back, frowning. "Holstead doesn't ring a bell. Rowe." He shuffled through a filing cabinet, fingers dragging across paper. He paused, then pulled a card free. David Rowe checked in for 3 nights, paid cash, drove a dark sedan, came with a woman, early 42nds, maybe. Brown hair, fashionable. They didn't use last names, just first. He signed everything. David. She signed nothing. Shaw felt her pulse climb. Did anyone else see them? Housekeeper said they kept to themselves. Rooms smelled of cigarettes. They left early, didn't check out proper. Keys on the table. He hesitated, then added, "Housekeeper said something else. Thought she heard them fighting the second night." Raised voices, then silence. Room 12 still sat at the far end of the row. Curtains drawn, the doors paint peeling beneath the Sunday Shaw stepped inside. It smelled faintly of mildew, though the sheets had long been stripped. Still, details lingered. Scratches on the cheap dresser top, a cigarette burn in the carpet, and carved faintly into the wood of the bathroom door, almost invisible unless the light hit just right. Okira Claire Holstead had been here. Vega crouched by the sink. "Look at this." He held up a small pill vial wedged behind the plumbing. The label had been torn away, but inside lay 2 capsules, pale blue. "Bagot," Shaw said. Every detail added to the puzzle. A couple living under false names, fighting, leaving things behind like breadcrumbs, and all of it far from the mansion where their perfect lives had been staged. By late afternoon, they sat in the Las Cruces police station, the desert sun slanting through dusty blinds. Local officers had joined them, scanning the files. "David Rowe," a sergeant muttered. "That name's come up before." He pulled an old case folder. 2 years back, a property dispute outside of Santa Fe. Man matching his description bought land under that name, never developed it, then disappeared. He slid a photograph across the table. Shaw's breath caught. The grainy surveillance still showed a man at a bank counter. Tall, dark hair, strong jaw. Even in poor resolution, the resemblance was clear. Nathaniel Holstead. But the clothes were different, less polished. The glasses, the posture altered. He wasn't posing as Nathaniel. He was someone else entirely. Vega leaned in. So the husband had another life. Money, land deals, and she was with him. Shaw tapped the photo. Maybe not with him. Maybe trapped by him. The sergeant shook his head. Dozen Square. Locals say she signed for paintings at a gallery here under the name Anna Vale. That wasn't with him. She came alone. 2 names, 2 identities, husband and wife, each playing separate roles, parallel lives that bent and twisted, but never overlapped where anyone could see. Shaw scribbled notes, her mind racing. The double life isn't just his, it's hers, too. That night, in a roadside diner lit by buzzing fluorescents, Shaw studied the evidence spread across the booth table, Claire's hotel receipts, Nathaniel's property deeds, 2 halves of a puzzle that didn't fit. Vega pushed his coffee aside. Here's the problem. If they both had aliases, maybe they weren't victims. Maybe they planned this, staged the disappearance, left everything behind. Shaw shook her head. Then why the blood? Why abandon the Mercedes in plain sight? She leaned back, staring past the neon reflections in the window to the endless desert beyond. Something gnawed at her. It wasn't just secrets. It wasn't just fraud. There was something calculated here, something meant to mislead. As the clock above the counter ticked past midnight, Shaw realized the Halsteads hadn't simply lived double lives. They had been playing a game, and someone else was moving the pieces. The Vale Gallery sat on a quiet street just off the plaza in Santa Fe, tucked between a coffee shop and a store selling turquoise jewelry. Its facade was understated. Whitewashed adobe, a single wooden door, no neon, no clutter. A brass plaque read simply, Vale. Detective Evelyn Shaw stood outside for a moment, watching passers-by drift along the sidewalk, oblivious. Tourists with cameras, couples sipping iced coffee. None of them could imagine the reason she was here, that this gallery might hold the missing threads of a woman who had vanished into myth. She pushed open the heavy door. A bell chimed softly. Inside the air was cool, scented faintly with varnish and cedar. Paintings lined the walls, abstracts in desert reds and golds, portraits of faces blurred with brushstrokes. A woman at the counter looked up from a ledger, silver hair swept into a bun, glasses perched low on her nose. "Good morning," the woman said. Her voice carried the refined calm of someone who had spent decades in quiet rooms. Shaw flashed her badge. "Detective Evelyn Shaw, Austin Police. I'm following up on a missing persons case. I was told a woman using the name Anna Vale purchased art here." The woman hesitated, then adjusted her glasses. "Yes, Anna. I remember her well. Can you describe her?" The woman smiled faintly, as if recalling something private. Striking mid-40 seconds, polished. She dressed with intention, tailored jackets, silk scarves. She carried herself like she'd grown up around galleries, not like a tourist, more like someone who wanted to be seen, but not known. Shaw felt the words settle like stones in her chest. That was Claire. What did she buy? Smaller pieces. Nothing extravagant, but tasteful. Always paid cash. Once she mentioned a house she was decorating. Did she come alone? The woman's expression shifted. Usually, yes. But one evening near closing, a man came in with her. He was quiet, stood back while she spoke. I thought he might be her husband, but she never introduced him. His manner, strange, watchful. Shaw leaned forward. "Can you describe him?" "Tall, dark hair, a little older than her. I only saw him once, but he looked at her as if he knew something about her no one else did." The woman shivered slightly, as though remembering. "Do you know where the pieces went?" Shaw pressed. She shook her head. She never had them shipped, always carried them herself, said she liked to keep them close. Back in the car, Vega scrolled through his notes. "So, she's buying art under a false name. He's buying property under a false name. What's the connection?" Shaw drove in silence, the desert stretching endless around them. Money laundering, maybe. Our cover stories for disappearing funds. Art is perfect for that. You can move thousands in value without anyone blinking. Vega closed his notebook. Or maybe they weren't working together at all. Maybe they were running from each other. Shaw considered this. In every case file, in every news clipping, Nathaniel and Claire had been presented as a pair, united, glamorous, inseparable. But here in New Mexico, their tracks diverged. 2 lives, 2 games, side by side, but not aligned. That evening, they met with a retired detective in Santa Fe who had handled missing art cases. His apartment smelled of pipe smoke and dust. Canvases leaned against the walls, tagged with evidence stickers. "You said, Anna Vale," he murmured, stroking his beard. I remember that name. Not from a crime report exactly, but from whispers collectors talking about a woman who was moving pieces off market, legitimate sales on the surface, but the provenance was messy. Originals traded for forgeries, that sort of thing. Dangerous territory. Dangerous how? Vega asked. Art isn't just paint and canvas, it's currency for people who don't want to use banks. You get involved in those trades, you step into shadows you can't walk out of. Shaw felt a chill. Claire Anna hadn't just been dabbling in art, she had been playing in the margins where money and danger intertwined. Do you know who she dealt with? Shaw asked. The detective shook his head. Never saw her myself. Just stories. But if she was moving in that circle, it wasn't by accident. Someone brought her in. Someone who knew how to use her. The next morning, Shaw and Vega sat in a diner outside Albuquerque, reviewing their notes. Sunlight spilled across 4 Misica tables. The smell of bacon and coffee heavy in the air. She's deeper in this than we thought, Vega said. Art deals, false names, he's got property scams. Both living double lives. So the question is, were they partners or marks? Shaw stirred her coffee absently. Or predators? Vega looked at her sharply. Think about it, she said. They vanish without a trace. The Mercedes shows up staged like a crime scene. Blood inside, but not theirs. They've got aliases in 2 states. This isn't just about disappearing, it's about manipulation. Maybe they weren't running from someone else. Maybe they were running the game. Her voice dropped lower, and maybe it finally caught up with them. That night, Shaw lay awake in her hotel room, staring at the ceiling. The air conditioner rattled, drowning out the silence. She kept seeing the initials carved in the motel bathroom door. Chac. Claire's defiance etched into cheap wood. Why leave that behind? Not fear, not accident, intention. Claire had wanted to be remembered there. A message scratched into the dark. Shaw closed her eyes. Somewhere in the desert silence, secrets still lingered, and they were only just beginning to surface. The land was nothing but dust and silence. 40 acres of desert scrub, a skeletal windmill leaning against the sky, the husks of old mesquite trees clawing up from the sand. No house, no barn, just a property line staked out in weathered posts stretching to the horizon. Detective Evelyn Shaw stood at the edge of it, the sun pressing heat against her neck. Beside her, Vega kicked at the dirt with the toe of his boot. This is what Nathaniel, David Rowe, paid cash for, Vega muttered. Middle of nowhere, no water, no utilities. What was he planning to do? Farm dust? Shaw didn't answer. She walked toward the center of the land, her boots crunching over dry gravel. The silence was oppressive, the kind that made every sound carry, the rattle of her keys in her pocket, the whisper of wind through brittle grass. Maybe it wasn't about building anything, she said finally. Maybe it was about hiding. They met the county registrar in a trailer office off the highway. The man, round and sweating, thumbed through records on a cluttered desk. Rowe bought the land in '96, he said, pushing a file toward them. No improvements filed, no taxes paid since '97. We were about to foreclose. The file contained 1 photocopied deed signed in a bold hand. David Rowe. No mortgage, no traceable bank. Pure cash. Shaw studied the signature, the curve of the D, the hard slash of the R. It wasn't Nathaniel's neat scroll. It was practiced, but different. He'd learned to write a new name, as if he'd been born with it. Anyone ever used the land? She asked. The registrar shrugged. Local kids drink out there. Hunters cross it sometimes. Sheriff's been called a few times for gunfire, but nothing serious. Gunfire? Vega pressed. The man nodded. Noise complaints, that's all. But folks out here don't ask questions. By late afternoon, Shaw and Vega were back on the land with a ground-penetrating radar unit borrowed from state police. The desert sun had begun to soften, shadows stretching long. The machine buzzed as it rolled slowly across the dirt, the screen flickering with grainy shapes beneath the soil. Rocks, roots, then something else. Shaw froze. There, a long rectangular shape, too clean to be natural, buried shallow, maybe 4 feet down. They marked the spot with spray paint. Vega's jaw tightened. You thinking what I'm thinking? Grave, Shaw said flatly. The excavation began the next morning under a pale desert sky. Deputies dug with shovels while crime techs photographed every inch. The earth gave way reluctantly, dust rising and choking clouds. Then the shovel struck wood, an old chest weathered and cracked, its iron hinges rusted through. The deputies hauled it up, setting it on the dirt. Everyone circled in silence. Shaw knelt. The lock had corroded. It broke easily under pressure. The lid creaked open. Inside lay bundles of paper wrapped in oilcloth. Shaw lifted one carefully. Bank records, titles, passports, each bearing different names, David Rowe and a veil. Others she didn't recognize. False identities, a library of lives. At the bottom of the chest, beneath the papers, was a smaller box. She opened it with gloved hands. Inside lay jewelry, rings, necklaces, a watch, some men's, some women's, and one item that made her blood run cold, a child's bracelet, plastic beads spelling out the name Elena. Shaw's breath caught. This isn't just theirs. Vega leaned over her shoulder. Whose are these? She shook her head slowly. Souvenirs. That evening, back at their hotel, Shaw spread the documents across the bed. Passports from 3 different countries, birth certificates, driver's licenses. Some bore Nathaniel's face, altered with glasses, different haircuts. Others bore Claire's, but some bore strangers, people she didn't recognize. She called the lab, run every name, every number, cross-check with missing persons. Hours later, her phone buzzed. Detective Shaw, the analyst said, voice tight, "We've got hits. 2 of the passports match open missing persons cases, one from Phoenix, one from Denver. Both vanished in the mid-90 seconds, both unsolved." Shaw sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. This wasn't just a couple living double lives. This was a graveyard of identities. Vega knocked on the connecting door, stepping in with a bottle of water. He stopped when he saw her expression. "What?" She turned the passports toward him. 2 of these belonged to people who disappeared years ago. Vega ran a hand through his hair. Jesus. So what were the Halsteads? Identity thieves? Killers? Shaw's voice was low, almost a whisper. Or collectors? People who lived through others until the seams came apart. She stared down at the bracelet again. The childish beads faded but intact. "Someone's daughter," she murmured. "Someone whose name was lost, and they kept this." Silence filled the room. The desert outside seemed to stretch endlessly, as if it might swallow every secret hole. But the chest had been found, and whatever truth it contained was clawing its way to the surface. The Austin Police Headquarters conference room smelled of burnt coffee and old carpet. On the table, crime scene photographs from New Mexico were spread like cards in a rigged deck. The chest, the papers, the jewelry, the bracelet. Detective Evelyn Shaw stood at the front, laser pointer in hand, her voice low but steady. 2 passports found in the chest belonged to confirmed missing persons. A man from Phoenix, last seen in '95. A woman from Denver, disappeared in '96. Both cases went cold. Both names reappeared in documents tied to Nathaniel and Claire Halstead under aliases David Rowe and Anna Vale. She clicked the pointer, red light landing on the bracelet photo. This bracelet belonged to a child. Initial records suggest it was sold in a chain toy store in Arizona in the mid-90 seconds. It bears the name Elena. We're cross-checking unsolved juvenile disappearances with that name. Around the table, agents from the FBI's Albuquerque office shifted in their seats. A regional task force had been hastily assembled. The Halstead's case now far exceeding Austin's jurisdiction. One agent leaned forward. "Are you suggesting the Halsteads were abducting identities from missing persons?" Shaw paused. The words felt dangerous even as she spoke them. "I'm suggesting their disappearance is connected to at least 2 other vanishings, possibly more." Another agent frowned. "But were they perpetrators or victims caught in the same web?" Shaw set down the pointer. "That's what we need to find out." Over the next week, files flooded in. Boxes of case reports from Phoenix, Denver, Albuquerque, and Dallas. Disappearances that had once seemed random were now lined side by side. Shaw worked until her eyes burned, until the words on the pages blurred. Couples vanishing mid-road trip, families leaving behind set dinner tables, half-packed bags, unlocked doors, and in every case, small inconsistencies, credit cards used days later, cars found abandoned but intact, purchases of art, purchases of land, always cash. Vega sat across from her, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled. It's like someone's weaving the same pattern over and over, he muttered. Shaw rubbed her temples, or the same people, testing how far they could go before anyone noticed. On the fourth night, Shaw drove alone to the Halsteads' abandoned estate. The gate creaked as she pushed it open, her flashlight cutting a thin beam across the manicured lawn gone wild. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust. She walked past the candlesticks frozen mid-drip, past Claire's scattered handbag, past the silent kitchen. She stopped in the study. Shelves of leather-bound books lined the walls. Tax records, real estate portfolios, dental journals from Nathaniel's first career. But tucked at the very back of a shelf, nearly hidden, was a narrow black binder. She pulled it free. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, couples smiling at restaurants, children in playgrounds, families posing beside cars. Some were clearly candid, shot from a distance. Others looked like stolen vacation photos. None bore names. Shaw flipped through in silence, her pulse thudding. Near the back was a picture she recognized instantly. Nathaniel and Claire at a dinner party. Claire's hand on Nathaniel's arm, both of them smiling, perfect, admired. Behind them, blurred in the background, was a little girl with a plastic bracelet, beads spelling out E-L-E-N-A. Shaw sat down heavily in the desk chair, the binder slipping from her hands. This wasn't coincidence. The Halsteads weren't just tied to other missing persons. They had been watching them, documenting them. The next morning, Shaw laid the binder on the task force table. This, she said, isn't just identity theft. It isn't just fraud. The Halsteads were keeping records of families that later disappeared. Photographs, names, artifacts. The bracelet ties directly to a child photographed in their presence. Vega leaned forward, his face tight. So, they were selecting victims. Shaw shook her head. Or someone was selecting for them. Think about it. Why keep a binder like this? Why bury the papers on desert land? Why scatter clues between Austin, Santa Fe, and Phoenix? They wanted to be found, but only parts of the story. The FBI agent at the table exhaled sharply. So, what are we looking at here? A husband and wife con team or something bigger? Shaw looked down at the binder at the blurred face of the child named Elena. Her voice was quiet, steady, but filled with dread. We're looking at a system, and the Halsteads were only one piece of it. That night in her hotel, Shaw couldn't sleep. She sat at the desk, binder open before her. She traced her finger over the photographs. Couples smiling, children laughing, moments frozen before they were erased. The double life. It wasn't just Nathaniel and Claire's marriage. It was an entire architecture of shadows. And if the Halsteads were gone, it wasn't because they stumbled. It was because they knew too much. The morning briefing was hushed, as if even the air in the conference room had learned to carry secrets. The binder lay open on the table, photographs of smiling families staring up like ghosts frozen in happier times. Detective Evelyn Shaw tapped the image of the little girl with the plastic bracelet. Elena, that's the name on the beads. We ran cross-checks. There are 3 open cases of girls named Elena who disappeared between 1993 and 1998, all under 10 years old, all unsolved. She flipped to the next slide on the projector, a school portrait grainy from an old missing child flyer. Elena Morales, age 7, vanished from a rest stop outside Phoenix in '95. Her family was never found. Shaw's voice caught slightly, but she pushed on. The bracelet matches the one described in the report by her grandmother. The Halsteads, or someone tied to them, kept this as a trophy. The silence in the room deepened. One FBI agent leaned forward. You're suggesting the Halsteads abducted children? Shaw's jaw tightened. I'm suggesting they had access to them. Whether as abductors, accomplices, or witnesses, we don't know yet. But Elena Morales' bracelet ended up buried in Nathaniel Halstead's land chest. That's not chance. Across the table, Vega shifted in his chair. So, the Halsteads weren't just living double lives. They were orbiting something darker. A ring. Maybe a network. Shaw nodded grimly. And if that's true, their disappearance wasn't escape. It was cleanup. By afternoon, they were in Phoenix meeting the Morales family. The grandmother, Rosa, lived in a modest stucco home on the city's edge. The yard was bare, only a faded tricycle leaning against the wall. She answered the door slowly, her hands shaking. "Detectives," she whispered, ushering them in. "You found something?" Shaw sat with her at the kitchen table, Vega beside her. The smell of beans simmering on the stove lingered in the air. Shaw opened a small evidence bag. Inside lay the bracelet, its plastic beads dulled with age. Rosa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled instantly. "That's hers, my Elena. She wore it everywhere. I bought it for her at the swap meet. She had it the day they vanished." Her voice broke. Vega leaned forward gently. "Tell us again what happened, ma'am. Anything you remember." Rosa nodded, trembling. "It was July. Hot. Too hot. My son Carlos and his wife Teresa took Elena on a short trip north, just for a picnic. They stopped at a rest area by the highway. Carlos went to get drinks. Teresa stayed with Elena. When he came back, they were gone. The car still there, doors unlocked, food on the table. Her tears slid silently down her cheeks. We searched everywhere. Police searched. Nothing for years. Nothing." Shaw's chest tightened. The scene mirrored too many others. Abandoned cars, meals interrupted, lives snuffed out without sound. She placed her hand gently over Rose's. "We believe Elena and her parents were connected to other disappearances. We're working to understand how. And this," she glanced at the bracelet, "is proof her story isn't forgotten." Rosa clutched Shaw's hand with surprising strength. "Find her. Find what happened, please." That night, back at their Phoenix field office, Shaw and Vega pored over maps and case files. Red pins marked cities: Phoenix, Denver, Austin, Santa Fe. Strings stretched between them like arteries in a dark body. Vega rubbed his eyes. "So, every family has the same pattern. Sudden disappearance, car left intact, signs of life afterward, cards used, receipts, someone keeping the illusion alive." Shaw nodded, tapping the binder, and the Halsteads were right in the middle. Claire buying art, Nathaniel buying land, both using stolen names. But the bigger pattern, her voice faltered. Vega leaned in. "Say it." Shaw exhaled. "Children, they're the common thread. Each family had one. Each child vanished with them. And in every case, an artifact turns up later. A toy, a photo, a bracelet, trophies." The word hung heavy in the air. By midnight, Shaw sat alone in her hotel room, staring at the bracelet under lamplight. The beads glowed faintly. Cheap plastic transformed into something sacred by grief. She imagined Elena's small hands threading it over her wrist, proud to spell her name. She imagined the moment it was ripped away, and she wondered if Nathaniel and Claire had watched, if they had collected, if they had participated. The thought made her stomach twist. She set the bracelet back in its bag and closed her eyes. Sleep wouldn't come, only the echo of Rosa's voice. "Find her. Find what happened." The next morning, Shaw received a call. "Detective," the lab analyst said, his voice urgent. "We pulled partial prints from the passport pages in that chest. One matches Nathaniel Halstead, another unidentified, female. And here's the kicker. We found traces of children's fingerprints on the jewelry box. Multiple sets." Shaw's grip tightened on the phone. "Children? Yes, likely under 12. At least 3 different prints. None match Elena." Shaw's pulse thudded. This wasn't just one child. There were more. And the Halstead's shadow was tangled in every one of them. The task force's temporary headquarters in Phoenix buzzed with a tension that never seemed to ease. Files stacked chest-high on desks. Phones rang without pause, and the whiteboard at the front of the room was crowded with names, dates, red string. Detective Evelyn Shaw stood staring at it, marker in hand. Each family pinned to the board had once been a neat, happy unit. Father, mother, child. Now they were symbols. Red lines stretched from their hometowns to the deserts of New Mexico, the galleries of Santa Fe, the highways of Texas. 6 confirmed vanishings between 1993 and 1998, she said to the room. Each one fits the pattern. Family disappears, car intact, credit activity for days afterward, and in each case, a child was present. She circled the word children in thick red ink. Artifacts linked to at least 3 of these children have been recovered. Elena's bracelet, a boy's baseball cap found in Denver, a girl's sketchbook in Dallas, all buried or hidden among H. Halstead property. Vega leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her. His voice was low but sharp. "So, are we ready to say it out loud? The Halsteads weren't victims. They were operators." A murmur rippled through the room. Some nodded, others looked uneasy. Shaw's marker hovered in the air. "I don't know if it's that simple," she said. "What we have doesn't prove they orchestrated this, but it proves they were close enough to touch it. Maybe willing participants. Maybe something else." By afternoon, the FBI analysts brought new results. Shaw and Vega sat with them in a side room, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. "Cross-checking travel records," the analyst said, sliding a folder across the table. "We found the Halstead's credit cards under aliases, placing them near 3 other disappearances: Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and Denver, always within days of the family vanishing." He hesitated, then added, "There's more passenger manifests. International flights paid in cash. Names matching their aliases show up on flights to Mexico, Belize, and Prague. Always following the disappearances, always with 2 or 3 tickets." Vega leaned forward, his jaw tight. "So, they were transporting kids." The analyst didn't answer directly. The dates line up too clean to ignore. Shaw felt her stomach turn. Claire's silk scarves, Nathaniel's perfect suits, all of it had been camouflaged. Behind them, shadows moved. That evening, Shaw and Vega returned to the binder of photographs. They spread the images across the hotel desk, trying to see what connected them. Vega pointed to one shot, a family smiling in front of a church. "This is from Denver. I checked the architecture. That building burned down in '94. This photo was taken just months before." Shaw leaned closer, and the family vanished in May 1994. "The timing fits." She traced her finger over the blurred background. A tall man stood near the church steps, just out of focus. Glasses, mustache. Her throat tightened. "That's Nathaniel." The discovery chilled her more than she expected. He hadn't just collected their names, their artifacts. He'd stood near them, watched them, documented them like prey. By midnight, Shaw sat alone with her notes, exhaustion buzzing in her skull. The line between investigator and victim blurred in her mind. She kept hearing Rosa Morales' voice, kept seeing the empty look in missing child photos. Why the children? She closed her eyes and tried to imagine Nathaniel and Claire at home in their grand estate, smiling for neighbors, raising glasses at charity dinners. How many nights had they sat at the same table discussing which family to follow, which child to mark? Or Shaw's mind faltered. Were they themselves marked? The binder, the chest, the artifacts, too carefully preserved, too carefully planted. Not trophies, messages. And if so, who were the messages for? The next morning, a call came from Albuquerque. A deputy sheriff's voice crackled through the line. "We've got something." An informant who claims to have seen the Halsteads after they disappeared, says they were alive, says they were with a group. Shaw's pen froze over her notebook. What kind of group? The deputy hesitated, said they called themselves the Veil, small circle, wealthy, moved between states, sometimes overseas. They dealt in more than money. They dealt in people. Vega swore under his breath. Shaw closed her notebook slowly, her pulse thundering. The double life wasn't just a clever trick of aliases. It was a veil, and behind it, something vast and predatory had been waiting all along. The informant sat in a windowless interview room, his hands folded neatly on the table. He looked ordinary. 40 sum, thinning hair, clean shirt, tucked into worn jeans. Nothing about him hinted at the words he was about to speak. Shaw and Vega sat opposite, the hum of the recorder filling the silence. "Start with your name," Vega said. The man shifted. "You can call me Daniel. That's not my real name, but it's the one I'll use. If this goes beyond this room, I won't live long enough to regret talking." Shaw leaned forward. "You said you saw the Halsteads after they disappeared." Daniel nodded once. "Not just saw. I was with them. Part of it. Part of the veil." His eyes flicked toward the mirror, as if expecting it to crack. He spoke in a voice low and careful, like each word was a brick pried loose from a wall he'd once sworn never to touch. "It isn't a cult. Not in the way people think. No gods, no robes, no chanting. It's a circle, private, exclusive, built around control. People of means, doctors, lawyers, politicians. They wanted to live lives without limits, to step behind the veil of law, of morality. And once you crossed, there was no crossing back." Shaw's stomach tightened. And the Halsteads, they weren't founders. They were recruits, Perfect recruits, wealthy, charismatic, beautiful people who looked like the world been around them. They were approached in 92. I think by 94 they were all in. What did they do? Vega asked. Daniel's eyes dropped. They tested boundaries. At first it was money laundered through art, land, false names. Then it was travel, identities traded like currency. And then it was people, families chosen because they fit the profile. Couples with one child, always one child. Shaw felt her pen tremble in her hand. Why one? Daniel hesitated. His voice when it came was raw because it was cleaner. Easier to erase a family unit than one scattered child. One meant you could control the narrative. No siblings to testify. No one left behind to ask questions. He described the gatherings in desert houses, the circles of polished faces sipping wine while discussing which identities could be harvested, the way children's toys were sometimes left on mantels, out of place, reminders of the power they held. They called it the harvest, Daniel whispered, taking lives, taking names, not always by killing, sometimes by folding people into the circle, sometimes by erasing them completely. But the children, they were the price, the offering. You give the circle your innocence, and it gives you a life without consequence. Shaw's chest felt tight. And the Holsteads, what role did they play? Daniel's expression hardened. Claire was the charm. She could walk into any gallery, any dinner party, and make people feel chosen. Nathaniel was the architect. He knew how to build structures, businesses, properties, paper trails. Together they were golden. Everyone admired them. Everyone wanted them at their table. Vega's voice was sharp. So what happened? Why did they disappear? Daniel leaned closer, his voice barely audible. They broke the circle, or tried to. They started keeping their own records, photos, trinkets, files, insurance, maybe guilt, maybe leverage. But in the veil, that's betrayal. And betrayal is erased. Shaw's heart thudded. The chest, the binder, the artifacts, not trophies. Insurance. They wanted to leave, she whispered. Daniel's eyes were bleak. No one leaves. That's why you found their things, but not their bodies. The veil doesn't spill blood in daylight. They disappear. You seamless, like you never existed. The interview ended hours later. Daniel, pale and sweating, refusing to say more. He asked for protection, though he doubted it would matter. Shaw and Vega walked out into the desert night, the air cool against their faces. The stars above glittered sharp and endless. Vega lit a cigarette, his hands unsteady. So that's it. The Halsteads were part of some predator circle, and they either got cold feet or greedy. Either way, the veil made sure they were swallowed whole. Shaw didn't answer. Her mind replayed Daniel's words. The offering, the harvest, no one leaves. She thought of Elena's bracelet, tiny and bright, buried beneath sand, a relic of innocence fed into something bottomless. And for the first time since the case began, Shaw wondered if she wasn't tracing a crime scene at all, but a ritual. The lead came from an unlikely source, a hotel ledger in Prague. Shaw sat in the task force office, jet-lagged analysts buzzing around her when the email pinged in from Interpol. She opened it, her pulse quickening. Hotel Europa, Prague, guest registry, October 2001. Name, David Rowe, accompanied by Anna Vale. Payment cash. Shaw read it twice, then a third time. The aliases were the same as on the desert chest. The date was 5 years after the Halsteads' disappearance. She printed the page and crossed the room to Vega, who was hunched over maps. Look at this. He scanned it, then swore softly. Rowe and Vale. That's them, unless someone else in the veil picked up their identities, Shaw countered. Vega shook his head. Too neat, too deliberate. If they were erased in 96, how do their names show up in Europe in 01? Someone kept them alive or let them live. That night, Shaw stared at her hotel ceiling, the Prague lead replaying in her mind. Daniel's words echoed. No one leaves. They disappear you. So, how had the Halsteads slipped through? She thought of the binder, the careful photos, the buried chest. If those were insurance, maybe it had worked. Maybe they had bargained their way into exile, surviving as ghosts under false names. But if they had survived, why no trace since 2001? And why leave the bracelet, the artifacts behind like breadcrumbs? Sleep never came, only the unshakable sense that Nathaniel and Claire were still out there watching, waiting. The next morning, Shaw and Vega met with an FBI cryptographer. On the desk between them lay one of the passports from the chest. "We scanned the lamination," the cryptographer said, "and found faint indentations beneath the printed page, invisible without spectrum analysis. It's a code," coordinates Shaw's breath caught. "Where to?" "Southern Utah. A canyon system." Remote Shaw and Vega exchanged a look. Vega muttered, "More graves or more messages," Shaw said. 2 days later, they stood at the mouth of a sandstone canyon, wind hissing through the crevices. Rangers had guided them in, leaving them with supplies and radios. They hiked for hours, the sun carving shadows across the red rock. Then Shaw spotted it, a symbol etched into stone, a circle cut by a single vertical line, the same mark that had appeared on the chest hinges. Beneath it, buried shallow in the sand, they found another box, smaller, newer. Inside lay photographs. Nathaniel and Claire, unmistakable, standing in a European square. Their clothes were modern, their smiles wide. Behind them, a clock tower read 1999, and tucked beneath the photos was a note handwritten in neat cursive. "We are alive, but not for long. If you found this, the veil is already behind you." Shaw's hands trembled as she read it aloud. Vega swore. So they knew someone would follow. They planted this trail. Why? To warn us? To taunt us? Shaw folded the note carefully. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded, because they wanted their story told, even if it killed them. Back at camp that night, the desert stretched endless and silent around them. Shaw stared at the note by lantern light, her mind racing. If Nathaniel and Claire were alive in 1999, alive in 2001, then the veil hadn't erased them immediately. Perhaps they had bargained, perhaps they had fled, but if they were still alive, then maybe they were still running, and maybe the circle was still watching. The thought chilled her more than death, because if the veil erased the Holsteads, what chance did she and Vega have now that they were holding the same secrets in their hands? The first sign came on the drive back from Utah. Shaw sat in the passenger seat of the rented SUV, the canyon walls receding in the rear-view mirror, the desert opening wide ahead. Vega drove in silence, the note and photograph sealed in an evidence folder on his lap. In the mirror, a black sedan appeared half a mile behind. At first, Shaw thought nothing of it, but every time they slowed for a curve, it slowed. When they pulled off at a gas station, it idled at the shoulder, waiting. "See that?" she murmured. Vega's eyes flicked to the mirror. His grip on the wheel tightened. "Yeah, I see it." They filled the tank, bought water, lingered. The sedan never moved. Back on the highway, it followed again. By dusk, as they crossed into Nevada, the sedan peeled away at an interchange, disappearing among semis. But the unease lingered, clinging to the air like smoke. In the motel that night, Shaw checked her room twice before locking the door. She left the bathroom light on, unable to shake the image of unseen eyes watching from the dark. She lay awake, the note replaying in her head. "If you found this, the veil is already behind you." The next morning, at a diner outside Las Vegas, Vega slid into the booth across from her, tossing down a folded newspaper. Front page Prague edition from last week. Shaw unfolded it, a blurry photo of a woman leaving a gallery. Tall, poised, scarf draped over her shoulders. She froze. It was Claire Holstead, her hair shorter, her face thinner but unmistakable. The caption beneath read, "Patron Anna Vale at exhibition opening." Shaw's throat tightened. "She's alive." Vega nodded grimly. "Or she wants us to believe she island." Back at headquarters, Shaw spread the photographs, the note, and the Prague article across the desk. The threads tangled, impossible to straighten. If Claire was alive, she was still using the alias, still orbiting the circle. But why surface in public after years hidden? A voice inside Shaw whispered the answer. Because she wanted to be seen. Because she wanted the story followed. That night, Shaw returned to her hotel to find her door ajar. Her pulse spiked. She drew her gun, pushing the door open slowly. Inside, nothing looked disturbed except the desk. The evidence folder lay open, its contents spread neatly. Photographs, the note, each placed in a line across the table, and in the center, a fresh edition, a single Polaroid. Shaw herself, walking out of the Utah Canyon, folded her under her arm. Taken from a distance, Her stomach turned to ice. The veil wasn't just behind them, they were already inside the investigation. Shaw called Vega. He arrived within minutes, his face pale as he studied the Polaroid. "This is a message," he muttered. "They're showing us they can reach us any time." Shaw nodded, her voice tight, like they showed the Halsteads, like they've shown every family before. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, too loud, too artificial. Finally, Vega said, "We're not investigators anymore, Evelyn. We're targets." Later, alone again, Shaw sat at the desk with the Polaroid. She turned it over, half expecting a message on the back. There was none, only the image, only proof. The veil had always been a shadow. Now, it was a mirror, and if Nathaniel and Claire had lived as ghosts for years before vanishing again, Shaw realized the same fate could already be closing in around her. She lay awake until dawn, her mind spiraling. She thought of the children's artifacts, the careful photographs, the binder. She thought of Daniel's words, "No one leaves." And she wondered, not for the first time, if the Halsteads had left the trail, not for justice, but for someone like her to follow, to take their place. The plane descended into Prague at dawn, the Vltava River catching the pale light like a strip of molten silver. Shaw stared out the window, her reflection ghosting the glass. Across the aisle, Vega dozed, though his hands still gripped the armrests tight, as if even in sleep he braced for impact. They hadn't told anyone in Phoenix where they were going. The Polaroid in Shaw's hotel room had erased any illusion of safety. The veil was inside their circle now. Secrecy was the only shield left. As the wheels hit the tarmac, Shaw whispered under her breath, "If Claire's alive, she'll lead us. If she's not, someone wants us to believe she island." Vega stirred, opening one eye. Either way, we're walking into their theater. The gallery was on a narrow cobblestone street in the old town, its windows dressed in crimson drapes. Posters from last week's exhibition still clung to the glass. Anna Vale, patron. Inside, the scent of varnish and old stone lingered. The curator, a pale woman with sharp cheekbones, welcomed them in halting English. "Yes, Anna Vale," she said, flipping through guest books. Tall woman, expensive taste. She bought 2 paintings, paid cash, very discreet. "Do you still have the guest list?" Shaw asked. The curator slid a page across the desk. Neat cursive signatures trailed down the sheet. Halfway down and a veil. Shaw traced the ink with her finger. The handwriting matched Claire H. Halstead's grocery lists from the 90 seconds, too perfect to be coincidence. "Do you know where she went?" Vega asked. The curator shook her head. "No address, but she left a message." She opened a drawer and handed Shaw a sealed envelope. Shaw's pulse spiked on the front in precise cursive for the detective who cannot stop. They opened it in a cafe across the square. The letter inside was brief, the paper heavy, the ink deep black. "We are not gone. We are not free. Follow if you dare." See beneath the signature, a set of numbers, coordinates. Shaw swallowed hard. Another trail. Vega tapped the paper. "Or bait. She's pulling us step by step." Why? To save herself, to bury us with her. The street outside bustled with tourists, but Shaw felt only the press of invisible eyes. Whoever see was Claire or her ghost. They were already moving the pieces. That night in their hotel overlooking the river, Shaw stood at the window, staring at the spires against the indigo sky. "You believe it's her?" Vega asked from behind. Shaw didn't turn. "The handwriting's hers. The patterns fit. If she's alive, she wants to be found. But what?" Shaw's reflection in the glass looked pale, hollow. What if the veil let her live? What if they're using her to lure us into their hands? Vega stepped closer. His voice was low, steady. "Then we're already in their hands." The coordinates pointed east toward the borderlands, remote forests, old ruins. As they prepared to leave, Shaw checked her bag. Evidence files, passport, gun. At the bottom of the bag lay a slip of paper she hadn't packed. Her stomach clenched. She pulled it out with shaking fingers. A Polaroid. This time not of her, not of Vega, of Claire Halstead herself, standing in the gallery doorway. The same scarf, the same eyes. On the back, a single line scrolled in ink. "She is not yours to find." Shaw dropped it onto the bed, her breath catching. Vega swore softly. "They're a step ahead. Always a step ahead." Shaw met his gaze. her voice barely a whisper. Then maybe the only way to find Claire is to let them take us where they want. Outside, the river flowed black and endless under the city lights. The veil had pulled them across an ocean deeper into its circle, and as Shaw lay awake in the foreign dark, she knew the final move was coming. Not from her, not from Vega, from Claire, or from whatever remained of her. The forest was silent except for the crunch of boots on frozen leaves. Shaw pulled her coat tighter, breath rising in pale clouds. Vega walked ahead, flashlight beam cutting through the dense tangle of birch and pine. The coordinates had led them here to a patch of wilderness on the Czech border, hours from the nearest village, remote enough that no one would hear a scream. Shaw's hand brushed the letter in her pocket, Claire's taunting script etched into her memory. "We are not gone. We are not free." The words felt less like a message and more like a verdict. They found the ruins near midnight, stone walls crumbled beneath ivy, the remains of a monastery long abandoned. The arches loomed like broken ribs against the moonlight. Inside, the air was colder, as if the walls still held centuries of grief. On the floor of the nave, a circle had been drawn in chalk. At its center, a small wooden box. Vega approached cautiously, gun raised. "Trap always," Shaw whispered. They opened the box together. Inside lay another photograph, Claire Holstead, unmistakable, though older, her eyes ringed with shadows. She sat in a dim room, hands clasped in her lap. On the back of the photo, "We chose wrong. We cannot undo it, but you must see." Beneath the words was another set of numbers. "Coordinates again," Vega cursed. "They're stringing us along like dogs." Shaw stared at the photo. Claire's gaze seemed to burn through the paper, pleading, haunted, half-deant. "Or she's begging us to finish what she couldn't," Shaw murmured. They left the ruins at dawn, frost biting their lungs. The new coordinates led to an underground chamber carved into the hillside, its entrance half hidden by moss. Inside, their flashlights revealed rows of shelves, boxes, files, photographs, an archive. Shaw's chest tightened. "This is it," she breathed. "The Holstead's insurance." Each box was labeled by year. 1992, 1993, 1994. Inside, names of families, travel logs, receipts, photos of children, smiling, oblivious. Vega rifled through the papers, his hands shaking. "It's everyone. Every disappearance tied to the veil. All of it documented." Shaw turned slowly, and there, near the back, she saw it, a file marked Holstead. Inside were photos of Nathaniel and Claire themselves, newspaper clippings of their vanished life, a death certificate, falsified passports, and at the bottom, a final letter. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "If this is found, then we are gone. We were both predator and prey. We wanted the veil, and then we wanted freedom. We were fools. Tell our story and maybe it will not repeat." C.H. Shaw's vision blurred. The words were not defiant. They were confession. Nathaniel and Claire hadn't just stumbled into the veil. They had chosen it, worn it like a second skin, and when they tried to shed it, the circle consumed them. Behind her, Vega hissed. "Evelyn." She turned. At the entrance, figures stood silhouetted against the pale light. 3, maybe 4, still watching. Not police, not locals, the veil. Shaw's gun was already in her hand, though she knew it was useless. The figures didn't move closer. One of them raised a hand, as if in warning or in benediction. Then, silently, they melted back into the trees. Vega's voice shook. "They let us live." Shaw looked down at the files, the photos, the Holstead's final letter. Her voice was flat, hollow number. They wanted this to be seen, to be carried, to be remembered. She placed the letter back in the file and closed the box. "They don't erase everything," she whispered. "They choose what survives." By the time they emerged from the hillside, the forest was awake with birdsong. Sunlight broke across the ruins, gilding the stones. To anyone passing, the place looked abandoned, empty, forgotten. But Shaw felt the weight of eyes still on them, unseen but near. Nathaniel and Claire had lived a double life, victims and perpetrators, puppets and players, and in chasing their ghosts, Shaw realized she and Vega had stepped into the circle stage. The veil didn't just harvest lives, it harvested stories, and now their story belonged to it, too. The press conference was brief. Vega stood at the podium, flanked by officials, speaking words they all knew were carefully measured. International evidence of organized disappearances, a long, unsolved case with new documentation. Investigations ongoing, no mention of the veil, no mention of the figures in the forest, and no names. Not Nathaniel, not Claire. Shaw watched from the back of the room, her face shadowed. Reporters scribbled notes, their pens hungry for a narrative that could never be given. When Vega finished, he met her eyes across the crowd. The look they exchanged was silent, weary, unbreakable. Weeks later, Shaw sat at her kitchen table in Phoenix. The desert light slanted through the blinds, painting stripes across the binder on the table. It wasn't the original. They had sealed that away in evidence. This was a copy. Inside were the photographs of the Holsteads, their aliases, their final letter. She traced Claire's handwriting with her fingertip. "We were both predator and prey." The words carried the weight of confession, but also of legacy. Somewhere out there, the circle still existed, maybe watching, maybe already choosing the next family to vanish. And Claire, whether alive or long dead, had ensured her story would not disappear into silence. She had written her way out of Eraser. That night, unable to sleep, Shaw stepped outside. The desert sky stretched wide above her. Endless stars pricked into black. She thought of the canyon chest, the buried artifacts, the bracelet of a child who had not been spared. She thought of Claire's face in the photographs, smiling in public, hollow in private. A double life, a double ending. Shaw closed her eyes and breathed in the dry night air. She would carry the story forward, not as evidence, not as myth, but as truth, jagged and incomplete. Because in the end, survival wasn't about living. It was about being remembered. The files remained locked away. The circle remained unbroken. And in some dim corner of the world, where shadows crossed between wealth and hunger, between power and silence, the veil still waited.